This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, where today we are getting our first look at Super Bowl 55 with George Chahrouri of Pro Football Focus and the PFF Forecast Podcast, getting his thoughts on the Bucs versus the Chiefs and a couple of player props he likes as well. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work at thepowerrank.com. Now, Ed, you were on the Bucs +3 this past weekend. How relieved were you when you saw Matt LaFleur decide to kick the field goal versus trying for the touchdown on 4th down?
I was relieved enough to be snarky on Twitter and say, hey, I thought this was like go for it territory for non-analytics folks. But yeah, it was nice, right? I mean, look, the Packers' path to covering 3.5 was pretty slim at that point anyways, right? So, I mean, you could definitely see a push and they converted there. But it was interesting because I feel like that play showed off a lot of personalities on Twitter. If you want some bad words, you go check out Nick Costos in that moment. If you want the kind of the typical analytics reaction, go to Ben Baldwin and his he was nonplussed at the decision to go for it. But then, he actually has a bot that tells him, increase in win probability. And going for 4th and 8 was only plus like 1.3% win probability. So that's not huge, right? And the reason is because 8 yards is a tall order, right? Yeah. It's not 4th and 3. That would have been a much different story in terms of, your likelihood of converting that and going for a touchdown. So, it was a moment that I'll remember for a while. I just enjoyed, catching all the different reactions on Twitter.
So I was watching, I think it was actually George Chahrouri, who we're going to talk here in a little bit. He was talking to Ben Baldwin about that bot, and apparently the bot assumed they would go for 1 as opposed to going for 2. Once Ben made the adjustment for that, it was 3.5 points, I think, of win probability, which is like, it doesn't sound like a lot, but this is the point that George made on Twitter, was that when your odds baseline are 7% and your odds if you go for it are 10.5%, you're going to take the 10.5% every time. That is actually a significant difference. Right. And so I think that is noteworthy that once the amendment was made, it was pretty impactful. But also, like, I listened to Matt LaFleur's justification for deciding to go for the field goal. He said, we had the 2-minute warning, we had three timeouts, we effectively had 4 timeouts.
Right.
But then you think about it the other way. Think about if you go for it and you don't make it. It's the Buccaneers' ball on the 8-yard line. You still have all those 4 timeouts because the play is probably not going to take 8 seconds. So you still have those 4 timeouts. You have the Bucs backed up to their 8-yard line, and your aggressiveness as Bruce Arians in that situation will be different than if the situation where you're at the 35 or 30-yard line or whatever. So I understand what he's saying, what Matt LaFleur is saying. I get where he's coming from. However, I think the advantages of having the Bucs on the 8-yard line if you don't make it and still having those quote-unquote 4 timeouts are really impactful, and I feel like that kind of got overlooked in the equation when he was deciding to kick that field goal.
For sure. And also, by another Ben Baldwin product, like, he had been the most aggressive person on 4th down this entire year, and it wasn't really close. So this was the place that John Harbaugh was at last year, and Green Bay had been really aggressive. So it was definitely a change in character. And then, to me, the most critical play in the game was the 4th and 3 that Tampa Bay had with 13 seconds left in the first half. So I'm sitting around watching the game with a Packers fan. I'm like, dude, there's 13 seconds left. You have to. I mean, there's little risk in going for it, right? Because you're only leaving the Packers with like a player or 2 from midfield. He got pretty mad at me, which I understand. But Bruce Arians is one of the least aggressive people on 4th down. And if the game script is just slightly different and there's 20 seconds or maybe 30 seconds left in the first half, I presume he punts that on 4th and 3 from midfield. So instead, you make the 4th and 3, and then you watch Kevin King screw up again and let a receiver get by him, that is a critical. I mean, clearly it's a critical 7 points with the way the game played out, right?
Yeah.
Because then then it's hard to overcome the 3 picks that Brady had in the second half. So to me, that was like the critical play in the game, and it could have gone way differently, just with the amount of time left in the half.
Well, it's also wild the defense that was played there. Kevin King obviously had a rough game, but like, he was put on an island against a guy with a lot of speed in Scotty Miller and asked, cover him by yourself. And like, I'm guessing what Mike Pettin was thinking, the defensive coordinator for Green Bay, he was thinking, hey, there's not a lot of time left. They may try to, throw it to the sideline to try to pick up some additional yardage because there were 6 seconds left in the half. But like, I think because there were 6 seconds left, you should have said, okay, they don't have enough time to run it out here, pick up 10 yards, and kick the field goal. They're probably going to bomb it deep. You should have at least thought about the scenario where they bomb it deep and go for the Hail Mary, which is what happened. So, again, Kevin King deserves his fair share of criticism too, but the idea that you put him on an island against, again, a very fast guy in Scotty Miller, that seems ill-advised. And it's weird that we're kind of forgetting about that play because the decision at the end of the fourth quarter was so egregious. Like, any other situation, we are harping on that end of the half play way more than we are, but they managed to make a decision that was even more wild later in the game that overshadowed the craziest play call you possibly could have imagined on defense.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it was a terrible, terrible way to lose if you're Green Bay.
Yeah.
Like, there are how many needles that you got stuck into your skin in just the worst possible way during those 3+ hours. So, but I mean, the game kind of had instant classic written all over it and lived up to it. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a fun game to watch. Like, even though I don't want to watch sloppy play and the 3 interceptions in the second half by Tom Brady were a little bit sloppy, I'm more accepting a sloppy play when it's Tom Brady because I think it's funnier then. So I'll definitely take it for sure. We're going to bring on George Chahrouri of Pro Football Focus. You can find him on the PFF Forecast Podcast and find him on Twitter at PFF_George. We're going to preview Super Bowl 55 with George, talk through the game, talk through the prep work that NBC does with Pro Football Focus to get ready for their Sunday night football games. Really fun conversation there to hear the kind of the nuts and bolts of the broadcast. We'll also talk to them about props as well. Next week, we'll have an additional show on covering the spread, and it's going to be a fun one. It's our first ever live covering the spread. It'll be Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope channels. Last year, we had JJ Zachariason on to talk player props before the Super Bowl. He had Pat Mahomes' first touchdown score at 20-1. So we're going to bring JJ back on. Also be joined by Erin Kate Dolan of FanDuel. We'll get her thoughts on Super Bowl 55, talk some props. If you have questions, we'll be able to take those live on air too. So, Ed, we're covering the spread and going live. Feels kind of big time. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to learning from others, the Super Bowl props that I should be betting.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll be talking about those next week. It will be on YouTube, but we'll also post it on here, the same podcast feed after the fact. So if you are a podcast listener, don't want to go to YouTube, understandable. I don't tend to watch stuff on YouTube either. You can still be subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be live there later on. Before we talk to George, though, we do have to go back through last week. Pretty good week for the podcast across the board when it came to the conference championships.
Covering the past.
Last week here on Covering the Spread, we had Jason McIntyre on to preview the conference championships. You can find Jason on Twitter at JasonRMcIntyre. Make sure you check out the Straight Fire podcast as well. We all had action on that first game between the Bucs and the Packers. As mentioned, Ed had the Bucs +3. Jason had the Packers -3. I had the over at 51.5, and the spread did close at 3. The total rose during the week and wound up at 53, so 1.5 points of value there, and you had the right read on the game. The Bucs offense threw 3 picks, but you still got the win. That's got to feel pretty good, aided by some wild decisions by Green Bay, but still a good process bet regardless. They did win that one 31-26, so you got the cover, I got the over. Pretty good week for us. And Jason also did say that he liked the over on Marquez Valdez-Scantling's receiving prop. 31.5 yards. He had a 50-yard touchdown in the first half. It's nice when you don't have to sweat those things, Ed.
Boom. I was looking for his tweet to retweet it, but I couldn't find it. But, boom, one play. Done.
I mean, if you can get one play over, and that was what we said about Marquez Valdez-Scantling, too. So that was helpful for sure.
Exactly what he said.
So
that was exactly the clip that you guys posted on Twitter. So props to you guys.
I didn't even know we were doing clips from that game, from that podcast. So hey, it worked out for me. I will not complain. Thanks, Cal. Appreciate that. In the late game, Jason was on the Chiefs -3 against the Bills. We talked before Patrick Mahomes had cleared concussion protocol, but Jason said, hey, he's going to clear. We're good with this. I'll lay the 3 with the Chiefs. And the number did close at 3, which I thought was interesting. It got to 3.5, and I think it might have been at 4, honestly, at one point on Friday after Mahomes cleared, but it went back to 3 when it closed. They did fall down early, 9-0, but I don't know. I don't know about you, Ed, but like when it was 14-9 and the Chiefs were on top, I kind of felt like it was over at that point. Did you have a similar feeling that like once the Chiefs were ahead, that game was just done?
I mean, not necessarily, but I just feel like you saw how efficient their offense was. You saw how, 64% success rate on passing plays, and it felt like more. So, I mean, maybe in that sense, I felt like it was done. But maybe in that sense, so maybe I didn't feel like it was done because I expected more out of Josh Allen.
Yeah.
And they, he just didn't have a great game. Just held on the ball too long a couple times. Didn't have a great game. It's fine. He had a great season. So in that sense, I didn't think like it was over, but yeah, I mean, Kansas City was on fire.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see the full Josh Allen experience. We got to see a couple glimpses of bad Josh, but I'm sure that Josh Allen's back next year, so we can watch him then. Brian Daboll back, so the Bills, still a team we'll be talking, I think, about in positive terms next year. So good call by Jason on the Chiefs -3 and with the MVS prop. So no cover for him on Green Bay versus Tampa Bay, but still a good week overall for Jason. Check him out on Twitter at Jason R. McIntyre, and also check out the Straight Fire podcast. We're going to bring George Chahrouri on in just a second, but first, the Kansas City Chiefs and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as I'm sure you've heard, are set to battle next Sunday. And FanDuel Sportsbook is giving you a chance to get in on the action with some can't-miss odds. Right now, new users can wager up to $5 on either the Chiefs or the Bucs at plus 5,500 odds. That is right, a $5 bet on either team can win you $275. Next Sunday will be here before you know it, so download the FanDuel Sportsbook app and make your first deposit to see the enhanced odds today. Must be 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Colorado, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, Michigan, Ed, Tennessee, or Indiana. New users only. Must wager on the designated Boost market. Must be 21 plus and present there as well. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Max bonus $275. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. Or in Tennessee, call the Tennessee Red Line, 1-800-889-9789. I'm endlessly grateful that there is not an additional phone number for Michigan or Virginia, but welcome to the FanDuel Sportsbook family. We're going to bring George Chahrouri on now. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at PFF_George and check out the PFF Forecast Podcast as well. Let's get his thoughts on Super Bowl 55.
Covering the present.
Let's bring George Chahrouri into covering the spread to break down Super Bowl 55 between the Chiefs and the Bucs. George, we appreciate the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's the first week without football. So part of me wants to kind of, chill out a little bit. But then you want to analyze from every angle that you can possibly imagine the best matchup of the year. So it's a great week. I'm excited, man. I almost didn't think we'd get here, but we're here.
Well, it's not just the Super Bowl. We also have, all this quarterback news. We got Jared Goff, we got Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers might be not super happy. Usually it's like a little bit of a break to have this off week, but it feels like everything is kind of combined to make sure, no, you will get no rest until after the Super Bowl, and probably well after, because it just feels like the news cycle is setting up for this offseason to be totally wild, which means you get no off week between the conference championships and the Super Bowl here.
I'm here for it. I'm here for the quarterback madness. I think it's going to be great. Someone made a comment that was like, we're going to see a lot of teams trade out their average quarterback for another average quarterback. And I was like, this is just dating in most people's lives. So I'm glad the NFL gets to experience it now.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I was tweeting this morning about like, please don't trade Deshaun Watson, which is probably a no-brainer amongst this group. But yeah, that's a great example, George. Hey, George, we're gonna get to the Super Bowl a little bit later, but I've actually been dying to ask you about your work with PFF and the Sunday Night Football broadcast. Tell us about like what you do with that and how that goes down.
Yeah, that's actually kind of how I got into PFF. I started working with the NBC broadcast. Obviously, Chris is the analyst on the broadcast. And so we do a lot of things behind the scenes, not just for Chris, but for the whole production crew, which is kind of preparing their graphics team with interesting pieces for the game. Preparing their production team in terms of like what to expect from different matchups and stuff like that. And then over the course of time, we have built in a lot more analytical robustness. So thinking about fourth downs, 2-point conversions, when to pass, when to run, things that I think a lot of people that spend their life in analytics in football are like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But then it angers them when they watch a broadcast because that often is not something that the broadcast crew is attuned to. So it's really a weekly thing. I'd say it starts as soon as the game ends on Sunday night. We produce a pretty robust preview that goes to Fred Godelli, Chris, and Al, and the whole graphics team, Fred Godelli being the executive producer. And then kind of throughout the week up until about Thursday, we're ironing that out, making sure everything is, double-checked, triple-checked, all that stuff. Thursday into Friday, kind of condensing those notes for Chris up until game time. And then during the game, we're monitoring things like fourth downs, letting Chris know if this is an obvious go-for-it situation or, heaven forbid, you should kick a field goal or punt. And communicating that to, Fred and the graphics team so everyone's aligned. So it's cool. I get to be on the headset. I have a setup in the office in Cincinnati that gives me a live feed. So I get to see the game before everyone else sees it, which is pretty cool. And I get to hear, this is the best part, I get to hear Al, Chris, and then Fred, the producer, talk off air, which is honestly priceless.
Well, that's fantastic.
So cool.
And it's been a very relevant discussion talking about the fourth down decisions, the field goals, and 2-point conversion attempts or decisions with that as well over the past couple of weeks. Is it frustrating for you when you watch a broadcast on another network where they may not have the same data that you have? Is it frustrating to hear the conversation around things such as 2-point conversion attempts, fourth down attempts, knowing that it may not necessarily be as informed as what you may have, when they actually do put stock into the information you're providing?
Yeah, it is. And I would say it's honestly, it's more, here's what frustrates me the most. What frustrates me the most is we'll spend all this time prepping, giving Chris everything. And every once in a while, he'll say something like, I hope they get the run game going, for the play action game. And he says it, he's been calling football for so long that there's so many things that he says that are second nature, and he has to make it sound good. And so I know he's never doing it on purpose, but I know that someone out there thinks that I'm okaying that beforehand. So that frustrates me, and it's through no one's fault of their own. The other broadcasts are interesting because to me that is not the talent's fault, not the people on screen. It is the error of the production teams. They need to think about these things. They need to their job is to tell the story of the game. And there are so many football fans out there that have no idea in 2021 what actually math is telling us about these things. And I think it's just they need to put more investment in there. I think, Fox is a broadcast team that we've worked a decent amount with, and I know that Troy and Joe are trying. And so that's really encouraging. And it's one of these things where I always try to remind myself, like, we spend our lives thinking about it. This is the 50th thing these guys are thinking about. So I've gotten more calm. That's my way of saying I've calmed down.
And I think the talent discussion is worthwhile because, like, when you're in that moment, it's so hard you have to give analysis, you have to go through all that stuff. Like you said, it's the 50th thing you're thinking about, trying to break down the math, trying to break down the different paths that could play out. It's a really tough thing. So I think that your emphasis on the production, and like obviously they have a lot on their plate too. I'm not saying that like their main focus should be on the analytical side of things, but like there's a lot going on. It's really hard to try to juggle all those things. So I think that you're right to bring up the fact that, like, we get frustrated with the broadcasters because they're the ones who say it. But, like, at the end of the day, there is a lot on their plate that they have to juggle. So I think that your emphasis in, like, it has to be a team effort. I think that is a smart topic to bring up, too.
And I would point this out. I think one of the inefficiencies in football, not from just from broadcasting standpoint, but in football throughout, is a focus on minor details that don't matter nearly as much as macro decision-making matters. And a great example of this is the fourth down in the Green Bay game, right? You probably spent as a broadcaster preparing for that so much time looking at, I don't know, wide receiver, cornerback matchups, right? When in reality, people are moving all over the place. Devontae Adams in 9 different positions on the field every other snap. And you cannot let those small things get in the way of making the right decision in those big moments, because that can cost you the game. It cost them the game twice, right? It cost them the game at the end of the half when Tom Brady ran circles around the entire Green Bay coaching staff. And then it cost them at the end of the game when they took the MVP and said, you go sit down. We're not going to give you a chance to win the game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't want to ever, like, I think the broadcasters do have a hard job. I would like to actually try, and I'm sure I would really fail. But I love that you are, you're in there with the conversations. And I presume that your executive producer is very open to the analytics and including you, right?
Yeah, Fred Godelli is a magician. Al and Chris are incredible at their job. But Fred Godelli is legitimately 99% of the things that Al or Chris says, you go, wow, that's incredible. Fred told him 5 seconds ago to say it. That guy is so on top of it. He studies more than I think the coaches do. And he's always trying to improve and learn more. And he admits, he goes, look, I'm not a math guy, but I recognize that this is an important thing to consider. So we want to bring it in here. And I'm not saying I'm going to understand it every time. Like 2-point conversions, when we had this conversation last year because it was really pertinent. I forget who it was that did it in a big spot that went for 2. And it was a big conversation. I was trying to explain it to him, and he goes, I'm going to need this explained to me 9 more times. I trust you. I know we need to include it. And I think that is the type of mentality. It's honestly the type of mentality coaches need to have and producers. Fred is great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like we can't really put an analytics guy in the booth, and we probably shouldn't, because that guy is just going to sit there and be like, small sample size.
Yep.
But I feel like we could get an analytics guy on the pregame show. So, George, if you don't want to do it, I'm definitely up for it. But that's where we got to get, like, more of this conversation, because a lot of people watch that pregame show, right? Like, that's, like, the most consumed, beside the game, that's the most consumed sports content out there. And I think that would be, like, the next progression for this country as a football nation.
Analytics, a little gambling tone to it. And then here's my thought in game, because I agree with you. I don't want to listen. I love listening to Al and Chris. I love listening to Troy and Joe. They're really good at their jobs. But when there's a big officiating call, they bring in Terry McCauley.
Yeah.
And Terry's great for those 30 seconds that he's on there. Bring someone in to talk about the fourth down decision. Like, that to me would be a really cool way of enhancing the broadcast without what I think a lot of people are trying to do, which is change something that I think works really well with the people that we have in the booth.
Well, and it goes back to what you said, too, where they have the broadcasters themselves have so much on their minds, so much they need to juggle and think about. Let them focus on their specialty. Like, Chris is a former player. Let him focus on the things that he knows really well, and don't shovel everything onto his plate and expect him to know everything. You can bring on this analytics person who can discuss the math behind why you want to go for 2 when you score a touchdown down 14. Like, having that and allowing people to focus on their specialty, I feel like would open up. It would make the broadcast better, but also it would not put undue pressure on the broadcasters to talk about things that they, don't focus on as much as we do.
It would get rid of the phrase that I just love hearing, which is, well, the analytics.
Yeah.
The reference to this, like.
Well, the analytics say, and then it's probably something the analytics don't actually say. Like, that's usually what follows it.
Well, here comes analytics onto the field again, forcing us to watch this team try and score more points. I'm really frustrated by that, And I think it would be fun. Al oftentimes, he is so great at interjecting his personality, which everyone loves, into the broadcast. And I think he would do a really good job of playing back and forth with that and allowing the viewers out there that are a little confused or think differently. And he would bring them in. He'd say, I don't agree with that, and give some and allow a little bit of back and forth that I think would help the conversation. Because one of the things that we need to get better at is not talking down to people. Just because you happen to understand, probability a little better, like, good for you, like,
gold medal.
Bring people in instead of, and I'm guilty of it plenty of the time too. So, I'm not saying that I'm some almighty being here, but I think it would help.
Yeah, absolutely. Making it more open to everyone is always, because no one's going to listen to you if you're condescending all the time. So I think that's a good point to make too. So hopefully you can sit back and yeah, exactly. Hopefully you can sit back and enjoy the broadcast on Sunday. But before we talk about the Super Bowl here, George, let's recap this past year, because on the PFF Forecast Podcast, you guys are talking betting a lot, and I feel like personally I learned a lot during 2020, but I also want to talk to our guests about what they learned during 2020, big lessons for next year. So what about for you, George? What were things you learned from this past year as a bettor that you think you can make yourself better next year?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I loved it when you sent it over, and I thought a bunch about it. And there are so many different things that come to mind. Here are a couple. The first is that I think this year, even though we talk about it a lot, it sometimes got the better of me in thinking about placing bets, and that is being overcome with zeal for a great defensive performance. And that is not to take anything away from great defensive performances, but statistically, we just know that there's a lot more variance in how defenses perform from week to week. And so while you want to be impressed by it when it happens, you don't want to bet on it happening again all the time. And the way that I would phrase it for people is, like, to me, as I was going through the season, what I tried to do every week was look at who are the best teams, who are the best offenses, and who are the best defenses. And the best team and the best offense every single week were the Chiefs.
Right.
And if you disagree with that, but like if you don't think that the Chiefs were the best team this whole season, like Stephen A. Smith, who had the Steelers up there a couple times early on, God. I really need to see your rationale. And that to me was a defensive thing, right? If you look at the best defenses, every 2 weeks there's a new best defense. And so I think that's something that I took away from the season. I think I learned it a little later on in the season. And then the other thing that came to mind was the importance of establishing priors. And that cuts two ways. So the first is thinking about a team like the Chiefs, for example, who got everyone's best shot this year and, didn't cover the spread like 8 straight weeks. And it's like, are the Chiefs reeling? And I think that requires a little more understanding of the past. And the same is true with rookie quarterbacks. We are really quick to say Justin Herbert was not accurate at Oregon. And okay, that's fine to analyze it that way. And at the same time, he played well this year, and I don't want to immediately ordain him great. And I think those are, so it's a little bit a way of saying, like, don't get overly excited about things that are exciting.
Right.
Which is a boring thing to say, but it's also, so I wonder if you guys run into this a bunch as well, because I think about it from a gambling analogy. Back when the World Series of Poker was really, exciting, everyone wanted to play poker. And I started playing poker online, and you listen to all these people go, look, if you really want to win money playing poker, it's a job. It's not like exciting, right? You're grinding it out. And I think betting is similar. Like, if you can have excitement doing it, but you might not be profitable. If you really want to be profitable, it's not going to be that fun all the time.
Well, that's the problem is, like, it's not fun to bet against Patrick Mahomes, which is very scary. So, like, it's not fun to bet unders. Like, there are a lot of elements of betting that are not fun, and they can still be profitable. Like, I'd never want to root against Patrick Mahomes. Therefore, I try really hard never to bet against him for that exact same reason. But, like, there are times where it's possible the Chiefs may be overvalued. I'm not saying that's the case this week. I would probably argue very much against that, but like it is tough to try to divorce the excitement factor from the analytical factor, and that's tough. And I think the other part too with the about not getting overly drawn into one game things is, for me, it's not where I will bet on a team because of a good defensive performance, but it sticks in my head as like this red flag where I'm like, do I actually want to bet against this team that just performed well when they just did this? And to me, it will prevent me from making what otherwise would be a good bet because I'm afraid of what I just saw. So I think, for me at least, it's less so betting based on that, but it's avoiding bets that might go counter to that. And I think that is also, it's along the same lines, but that's my personal shortcoming, I think, is being hesitant to bet against regression, basically.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with those points. I mean, I think you gotta, I mean, NFL out of any league is definitely a league of regression to the mean. And the point you bring up, George, about the defenses, defenses aren't as stable as offenses, right? Like pass offense is the thing you want to be good at and the most reliable thing to be good at. And obviously Kansas City that's what they're all about. But yeah, we saw Pittsburgh's defense fall off in a catastrophic fashion in that game. And I think that just illustrates your point, George.
Yeah, I caught a lot of flack for saying that the Steelers were overrated to the point where NBC had a bunch of Steeler games, and Chris gave me a call 1 week before a Steeler game, and he's like, "Man, you better be right."
Did you call him back after the playoff game and say, "Chris, scoreboard"?
Yeah. He goes, so it was before. So they did that Baltimore-Pittsburgh game that was pushed back. Game. So they had that one, the COVID game. And then they had Baltimore-Buffalo a few weeks later. And it was before that game. And he goes, I understand you did a great job explaining why. And I think, I'm going to agree with you, but I just really hope you're right. And so when the Steelers I'm like 2 blocks away from the Bengals stadium. So I like to think that I was literally living in Big Ben's head during that collapse, just sitting there clapping my hands, drinking my tequila. And I have nothing against the Steelers personally, but their fans are rambunctious, and they came at me. Some players, retweeted me, and I loved it because that's what makes the game great. But I had to get a little fun out of it myself when I was right at the end. Well,
it was the players retweeting it at the time, but then after the collapse happened, it was a lot of your colleagues at Pro Football Focus saying, hey, BT Dubs, George was right, which had to feel pretty good too.
There was a lot of silence from the Steelers locker room at the end of the season. And right. I don't know. TikTok obviously takes a lot of time, so maybe they were busy. But...
That's perfect.
George, let's move on to the Super Bowl. We have Kansas City as a 3-point favorite. It's juiced at FanDuel Sportsbook at -122. What are you thinking about this game?
Man, this one, so I thought it would be 3. That was kind of we try to guess the lines on the forecast ahead of time so that we kind of get a sense of where we're leaning. And 3 feels, pretty spot on. I will say this, though. When the Chiefs went down 9-0, I immediately looked to bet on the Super Bowl and got the AFC winner -1.5. And that, so I'm really happy about that. And now looking at 3, and I wonder, is 3 really just pandering a little bit to the Tom Brady story? And it is a great story, and people want to bet on Tom Brady. From a power rating standpoint, we have the Chiefs as about a 5.5 point, 5.5 points better than the Bucs are. And so how do you get from 5.5 to 3? That's tough for me because you don't have an advantage. The Bucs do not have an advantage at quarterback. They don't have an advantage from a scheme perspective. In fact, I would say they have a pretty significant disadvantage from an offensive scheme perspective. And we just talked about defense. The Bucs have capitalized on turnovers over the past 2 games at a ridiculous rate. at a ridiculous rate. And Tom Brady threw back-to-back picks against the Packers. The Packers didn't pick up a first down after either of them. So you look at those two games and you go, okay, MVP against the Saints was Drew Brees. Do the Bucs even score in that game without Drew Brees? And then against the Packers, you've got this calamity of errors for the Packers and a really uncreative, a lacking in creativity from the offensive standpoint. And so to me, the Bucs, I think, are a little overvalued here. I would still take the Chiefs at -3. I wouldn't want to bet it with the hook. I would probably lay off a little bit if it got to 3.5 and look maybe more towards the over in that situation. I think that's where I'm headed now, but I'm very curious to hear what you guys are thinking.
So you have 1.5 with the AFC winner from that game.
Yeah.
Are you probably going to stand pat with that, given this one is so juiced at -3?
I probably will, and I will look. Here's one other thing I learned this year. If you aren't betting player props, I don't know what you're doing, okay? Because it's fun to bet sides, it's fun to bet totals, but the inefficiency is in player props, and in particular, the unders in player props. And that's one of the things at PFF, we built a props tool for this year, and it was like wow, there's a lot of value on a lot of these unders. It's not fun to talk about them, but you're going to win if you bet them. And so I will definitely look to play a ton of props in this game. And I think the over is something 56 was, I think, what it opened at. It's 56.5 now, I believe. And I don't know how this game plays out in a way where there isn't a lot of scoring. I think there almost has to be an injury of some kind for like that not to happen. So I think that's where I would play this game, since I already have 1.5 and I have some Bucs futures. But no one cares about my bets. No one cares about my bets.
We care. That's why I have you on.
Yeah.
There's a reason we have you as a guest on the show, George. So we wanted to pick your brain on that. But you're talking about the over here. What leads you towards liking the over where it's at 56.5?
Okay, so let's think about this. The Chiefs are incredible, and they put up an offensive performance against the Bucs that I don't think was represented in the score in that game. The ease with which they just took apart the Bucs defense, and what the Bucs do best is blitz. That is their calling card. But you can't blitz Patrick Mahomes because he will absolutely destroy you. And so I think it puts the Bucs in a situation where they need to change their defense to try and compete. But I don't know that that's changing their defense means they're doing new things. And that means there's going to be confusion. And if there's one person that's going to take advantage of that confusion, it's Andy Reid and the Chiefs. So I see no problem. I know that both tackles are out. And what I would remind people of is that Patrick Mahomes does a better job of navigating the pocket, creating open and clean pocket throws than anyone else. And that they played the 49ers last year, who had a pretty good front four as well, I might add. So from the Chiefs' perspective, I'm not worried about it. And then if I look to the Bucs side of things, the Bucs might get out to a lead. Okay, if they get out to a lead, then I'm confident Mahomes is, that's what he does. He's going to excel there. If the Chiefs get out to a lead, well, then the Bucs are going to have to abandon the Leonard Fournette 3 yards in a pile of dust game plan, which they love so much, and start throwing the ball downfield, which I have no worries about from Tom Brady. He led the league in completions and yards on throws 20-plus yards downfield. His arm is fine. So I like both those game scripts to get me over 56.
Excellent. So, George, you mentioned some props. Let's talk about some of them. Is there any of the ones over at FanDuel Sportsbook that you'd like to share?
So the first one that caught my eye is a prop bet that I'm not advising mathematically to bet, okay? I can't in my right mind say, look, the math backs this up. And I'm looking at the PFF props tool, and it's telling me no. But my body is telling me yes, Ed, and that is Leonard Fournette anytime touchdown scorer. Because I have a belief that Bruce Arians wants to get Leonard Fournette a touchdown to rationalize the decision to make Leonard Fournette the nickelback. Okay, so that is one that I'm going to bet just to kind of cover my ass. A couple that I do like in both a spiritual and a mathematical sense so Tom Brady. Now I'm not sure if this one's on FanDuel. There's a couple that I did see on FanDuel, but when this does come up, Tom Brady's rushing yardage prop is interesting to me. If it's at 1.5, I kind of like the over there. Thinking about a couple of sneak opportunities for him, getting a couple of yards on a sneak, and I don't anticipate that he will be taking knees in this game. That's not my assumption there. From an anytime scorer situation and a first-time scorer situation, which I like both of those, and that you obviously get different odds there. Travis Kelce appeals to me. So Travis Kelce, I think anytime to score a touchdown is like minus 165 on FanDuel. I've seen him 175 in some places. And look, the Bucs linebackers, Lavonte David's great. Devin White allowed more receiving yards than any other linebacker this year. So I think Andy Reid will leverage Travis Kelce there. I think he's about 600 plus 600 as a first time. The first touchdown scored. I like that as well. So I'm all about Travis Kelce in this game. I think that's where the Bucs will try to keep Tyreek Hill from going for like 300 yards on them, and that will open up Travis Kelce to do what he does best, which is destroy the middle of the field.
We saw that adjustment by the Bucs in the first game where they decided, no more 200-yard quarters for Tyreek Hill. So I think that the emphasis on Kelce there does make sense. Now, George, I know you're standing. I might urge you to sit down because the Tom Brady rushing yard prop not only is 0.5, like 0.5, but it's juiced up to plus 198 on the over. So I just got to warn you that might be your bet.
Deep breaths.
Your must-have for this week.
So we do a pregame show every week that we just started because we have a new studio at PFF and we wanted to use it as much as we could, right? And so we do this show every pregame, and I have taken it upon myself to talk about the props for the people, to get, because I know there are people out there that they're looking to make some extra cash here, and I want to let them know. So my favorite props are quarterback rushing overs, because there's nothing more fun than watching a guy drop back, hoping chaos happens, and they have to scamper. Now, Brady's not going to do that, but a 0.5, man, I mean...
I think there's value in the Brady touchdown props, too, because we know that they will go to the sneak attempts in the goal line. First touchdown score is 24-1. That's not quite long enough for me to get tempted, but I did look into it for that exact same reason, because we know the Chiefs have taken the QB sneak out of the playbook. The Buccaneers very much have not. It's basically page one for them is the quarterback sneak. So Tom Brady props rushing at the front of George's mind. That is George Chahrouri. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at PFF_George and check out the PFF Forecast Podcast. Already have a podcast up talking about this game, recapping the conference championships as well. Check that out. There is a link to the PFF Forecast Podcast in the notes over on numberFire.com. George, thank you so much for your time. Good luck to you with all your bets for the Super Bowl, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
I appreciate you guys having me on. This was a ton of fun, and I'll mention to all of your listeners, if you want to bet some props, Super Bowl 25 promo code will get you 25% off. So don't say I didn't ever do anything for you and your listeners. But I love it. This was awesome, guys, and good luck with all the bets you're going to place in the Super Bowl.
Not only gracing you with value, but also gracing you with a promo code. That is George. Thank you so much, George. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to George Chahrouri for joining us here on Covering the Spread. Check him out on Twitter at PFF_George. And as mentioned, the PFF Forecast podcast link is up on numberFire.com in the post for this podcast. Ned, I like the idea of an analytics guy on the pregame show. Do you have any analytics background? Any websites you've created? Any books you've written or anything for your resume here?
Yeah, if the NBC guys or producers are listening, man, I could, a little bit of analytics, a little bit of betting, a little bit of humor. I'll sign up. So I think it's great.
I think it was fun when they had Steve Kornacki on the NBC broadcast, the NBC pregame shows, to break down the playoff odds and stuff like that, breaking out the drawing board and all that. So we can get a Steve Kornacki-esque figure in to break down fourth down decisions and stuff like that. I'm in. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I could not do that myself because I don't want to interact with people, but like, hey, someone else can take it up for sure. Let's dive now into covering the future. We, again, are going to have a show next week as well, so we'll have more stuff around Super Bowl 55, but you want to start things off here, Ed, by talking about the spread in this game. What are you seeing for the Chiefs versus the Buccaneers?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk about the two teams just real quick. I mean, Kansas City, look, they only do one thing really well, and that's throw the football, right? You look at running the ball, they're not great. They're 14th when I look at adjusted success rate. The defense, the pass defense 12th. Rush defense is last in the league. But the NFL is a passing league, and throwing the ball is the most important and the most reliable thing, kind of statistically when you look at things. And so if you want to build a team, like Kansas City has done it the right way. And, I mean, no one's really stopped them in the playoffs yet. I mean, well, with Patrick Mahomes, of course, little hiccups when he went out of the Cleveland game. So I do feel like, Kansas is a 3.5 point favorite. The performance has definitely justified it the last two games. But, let's not forget, they didn't play their starters week 17 against the Chargers. And then they scored, 17 points against the Atlanta Falcons defense the week before, right? So, every team's going to have its ups and downs. Clearly, if they play as well as they did against Buffalo, they're going to do pretty well. On the other side, like Tampa Bay hasn't looked particularly good in the playoffs. You think about like the +4 turnover margin against New Orleans. You think about the 3 interceptions that Brady threw at Green Bay. It didn't cost them for reasons that we've talked about already. And he was just really good. He had a couple big plays but I mean, there were close games. So I think this line of Kansas City being favored by 3.5 points is a little bit based on this recent form. Tampa Bay being, good enough to get through, Kansas City just being pretty explosive on offense the last two games. My model sees a much closer game. They like Kansas City by 1.4 points. So definitely suggesting value on Tampa Bay. And part of that is Tampa Bay's defense, which has been really good this season, ninth. The pass defense has been 9th when I look at my pass defense by adjusted success rate. So, and I think they can do enough to slow down Kansas City to keep Tampa Bay in this game. I would definitely take Tampa Bay +3, and that's what I like in this game.
So we've been talking about how I've been trying to tinker with my own numbers, and I want to read you my number after I pull up the Excel spreadsheet, which is taking a second here to open. But you said 1.4, correct? Mm-hmm. Mine's 1.8 in favor of Kansas City. So I feel good confirmation bias. However, again, my cardinal rule is never bet against Patrick Mahomes because it frightens me. So
yeah, it should frighten.
Yeah, it does. It does frighten me. I violated that, I will say. We've been doing a playoff betting show on the YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope channels. I did recommend an underdog moneyline parlay between the Bucs and the Bills. Got one half, not the second half, and that did violate my rule. So felt pretty bad about that, which means that I can't. I like we talked about George. Like I can't bet against Patrick Mahomes. But it does feel good to know that my model is in line with yours. The other thing my model says is the under for this game is pretty enticing. But again, that entails betting against Patrick Mahomes from an offensive perspective, and I value my mental health and don't want to do that. So instead, my covering the future is talking about the Bucs under 26.5 points. The numbers I have say the total for this game should be lower than 56.5. I'm okay betting overs on really high total games, but it's tough when that requires the Chiefs offense not to do a whole lot, and I don't want to go against the Chiefs. So I'm going to stick with just the Bucs sides here. I want them under 26.5 points, which is -104 at FanDuel Sportsbook, and the risk here is that 27 is the most common point total for the entire 2020 season. It's a key number. I'm right near that key number. That does make me a bit nervous, and that's why I like the juice being at just -105 here. That's helpful. Does scare me a bit, though. The main reason I want the under here is that the Chiefs are built well to stop this specific kind of offense. The big issues the Chiefs have defensively is they struggle to stop the run and they're not good against fast wide receivers or slot receivers. Good guys there. Chris Godwin actually does check both those boxes, works from the slot a lot, has good speed. That's not the strength of this Bucs team, though. The strength of this Bucs team offensively is Mike Evans. He's an outside wide receiver. When they go deep, they go to Evans. He leads an overall target share, too. He's a big focus in the red zone. And the Chiefs have shown they can hold that type of guy in check. Stephon Diggs and John Brown combined for just over 100 yards last week, and Diggs had surpassed that number by himself in the previous 5 full games. They were really good in that Bills game of neutralizing Stephon Diggs, and I'd expect them to put a similar emphasis on Mike Evans in this one. The Bucs aren't going to do much on the ground. They tried against the Packers. Their early down first half pass rate was lower than their full season numbers. They were more run heavy than they were for the full season. It just didn't work. They're the 18th ranked rush offense. Not surprised they would struggle in trying to do that. Basically, I think it's just not the ideal kind of defense for the Bucs to face. We saw a similar pairing last week where the Bills, they're also a team that struggles to run the football. They struggle to get production from the slot, especially with Cole Beasley playing with a broken leg, apparently. They are mostly a team that feasts their outside wide receivers, and their offense couldn't operate very well. I think this is a pretty similar spot here with Tampa Bay. The Chiefs defense played awesome in that game, so I'm expecting something pretty similar here, so I will take the lower juice and bet the Bucs under 26.5 total points at minus 104. I agree with you that this Bucs offense is really good. I have been on the Bucs for a while. I did bet them last week as well as part of that parlay. But I think against this specific defense and the way that they are built, I think it's a tough spot for them. And it kind of goes back to what you said, where the Chiefs are built the right way. Not just offensively, Ed, but also defensively. Their emphasis is on stopping the pass. And I think that we focus on the offense, but the defense is also taking a smart approach, which just shows that the overall team building on the Chiefs is the way that most teams should operate too.
Well, and then teams like the Giants absolutely don't. So,
right.
The Chiefs. I've been surprised. I really, when they took Clyde Edwards-Helaire with the last pick in the first round, I really thought they should draft a cornerback. But their cornerback play has been quite good, and their PFF cover grade I think is 10th in the NFL. They really struggle with pass rush, and you can always tell that when you have an interior lineman leading your team in sacks. Although Chris Jones is clearly a stud. I think their coverage is good. I still give the edge to Tampa Bay's receivers. I would give the edge to Tampa Bay's receivers. So I do think that they're going to be able to score on Kansas City's defense.
Maybe we'll get more talk about the Tampa Bay wide receivers next week on our prop show extravaganza. Once again, that'll be Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope channels. So make sure you are subscribed there with ourselves, JJ Zachariason, and Aaron Kate Dolan as well. Should be a pretty fun show. Looking forward to being live. And again, that will be on the podcast feed immediately after as well. That is all that we have, though, for this initial look at Super Bowl 55. Big thank you once again to George Chahrouri. Once again, find him on Twitter at PFF_George. Check out the Pro Football Focus PFF Forecast Podcast. Check out George again on Twitter at PFF_George. Ed, what is going on for you in this down week, I guess, over at the Power Rank?
Not a lot. I'm working on college basketball numbers. Please sign up for my free email newsletter. Looking ahead past football season, I offer a cheat sheet for you to fill out your March Madness bracket. Makes it dead simple to do that. So you can always get that at thepowerrank.com.
Alrighty, and make sure to check out the Football Analytics Show as well, thepowerrank.com and the Football Analytics Show. Find Ed on Twitter at thepowerrank. I am at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Back with you once again next week for our prop-based show for Super Bowl 55. We'll talk to you then. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.